So yeah, we'll just get started. So tonight's webinar will be communicating how home gardeners can green WA. So for those of you who are joining for the first time, my name is Katie Grayson and I will be your host and moderator for the on behalf of the Wildflower Society of Western Australia. Of course, before we begin tonight, the Society would like to pay our respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians where we are hosting and recording this webinar today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, as well as the custodians of the various lands where everyone joins us from. So as usual, the presentation will go for around 45 minutes, where we will follow with some Q&A. So please send through any questions you have in the chat, or if you would prefer to ask yourself, no worries, just raise your hand in the toolbar and we can unmute your mic. We do again have a little short survey at the end. So once you leave the webinar today, it'll pop up in your browser. It's only about 7 questions or so. So if anyone could, or if everyone could, please fill it out. Any feedback and contributions are really, really appreciated. As I said, we have run into a few technical difficulties with our website, as well as some of you, I'm sure, are aware. So if anyone does run into any issues or just needs a hand getting into anything or lose connection or anything, please contact the email address listed on the events page or just reply to the email that you had your ticket sent out to. And hopefully we can work through it. So for our October webinar, we are very excited to be joined by our guest speaker, Nancy Scade from the Australian Native Nursery. We have all had the very unfortunate situation where we have just picked up some new native plants to put in our garden and they just don't survive. Ourselves, time and money falling victim. Well, Nancy puts this down to a large gap of knowledge between our environment and our local plants in WA. Today, Nancy will be bridging this gap and help WA gardeners to get their garden to not only survive, but thrive. And in doing so, ultimately leading this knowledge to be transferred to our local government bodies and together green WA. So I will let Nancy take over now and we can get started on why we're all here tonight. So thanks, Nancy.
Thank you and welcome everybody. I'm just going to read this out because this is what started me, or not completely started me off on the journey. But Peter Binden from the WA Museum in 1997 wrote that there must be thousands of disillusioned gardeners around whose plants have suffered continual failure due to too little knowledge of the West Australian environment and conditions. The efforts of the home gardeners to green Australia will ultimately filter through to our terminally ignorant local government bodies, which is a bit sad, isn't it? Sadly, after 200 years of living with our native flora, there's still little understanding by Australians, particularly by public agencies, of the potential of our floral resources. And then one of my land care colleagues said, there will be a price to pay by all of us for being native flora gardening illiterate, and I do believe that's true. My journey started some time ago. For the last 25 years, I've been growing and selling native plants, and it's taken me all this time to learn how to grow them really effectively without using any fungicides or herbicides. And I've had a lot of help from the people I employ and others, giving me all sorts of suggestions. But there's a whole area that I've completely missed out on, and I think we all do. And it's all in what you see in front of you and a lot more. On the green, on the top left-hand side, all the green folders are Australian plants folders. Somebody several years ago came in and said his father had died and did I want them? And I just gaily said, oh yeah, I'll have them. And a whole wheelbarrow load came through. And this is them in our shed. They've been there for several years now. And further down, there's the very first Australian Plants magazine, which you can see. And then next to it is an invoice, and he paid $100 for that first issue, which I thought was pretty expensive. Anyway, I started with the first issue, and I haven't read all of those up there, but you can see some more up the top and all the landscapes. And then on the right-hand side, you can see Australian nature magazines. These have all been given to me. So the ones, the Australian plants at the top, along with an awful lot more, Hazel Dempster decided she had to downsize about 3 years ago, and her family were going to throw a lot of her stuff. And I persuaded her granddaughter to give it all to me. And so I've benefited hugely, not just from her copies of Australian plants too, but her copies of all sorts of other things that are really interesting. And I haven't even had time to go through them all. Then my neighbor Greg went to the Armadale dump shop, and they said, oh, for $10, do you want all these landscapes, and do you want all these copies of Australian nature? And he said yes, and gave them to me. Now, I started by going through the landscapes and the Australian nature, and you can see all my markers on them. Now, I can honestly say that there's hardly one magazine of this lot that I haven't found something in that's been useful. It's tiny little snippets to really good articles. And I have had such fun, but I can tell you what, still got a whole lot more to do, especially of Hazel stuff. And I think I've probably done all the Australian nature magazines that are available to me. Somebody's now offered me a whole lot of Australian Geographic. Yes, so I think I'm going to be busy, but it's very enjoyable. I've also been given lots of books, and I've collected lots of books. I have got 2 shelves groaning in books. So there's a lot more to do. And I think what I have realized is that there's a huge gap between Flora Base and Gardening Australia and the people who do the garden shows on the telly and on the radio, because we just don't know enough of what's going on around us, and we're just too busy just putting plants in the ground and failing, I think you could say. On the bottom right-hand side is my latest book that I've just got from the Pilbara Native Plants. The Wildflower Society very kindly gave it to me as a gift last year, but I didn't get it till last week. And I wish I had got it earlier. It is a fantastic book, and they're selling it, so buy it if you want to know anything about the Pilbara, because it's really good. And the way it is written will be what I'm wanting to copy to a large degree for what I'm planning. This is the beginning of Flora Base, so I'm told. Hazel Dempster told me that if it wasn't for the Wildflower Society, who were able to get a grant to start this off, it probably wouldn't have happened, because the herbarium couldn't apply for a grant, and neither could Kings Park. So this has been probably a really good step forward for all of us. I used to use this. You can see how it's been damaged quite a lot, because we used to use it a lot until Flora Base kind of came online. I did speak to Neville Marchant quite recently, because he was the head of the herbarium when this was started. And I asked him questions of why hasn't it expanded and things like that. And he said that they've always been a monetary problem with getting it to really take off even more. So that's pretty sad, really. But it has actually helped a lot of people, because a lot of people have published books and used this descriptions from this for their books, like the one on the plants of Margaret River and the Kings Park book and things like that. And even Wikipedia uses a lot of the descriptions from this. So it's certainly not wasted, but ours doesn't get used so much more anymore, because we can just go online and look from there. So back to Peter Bindon. He said, the information is available, and I agree with you because like I've got all those magazines and things, but what has always been missing is clear communication of that information in ordinary words that we can all use and understand. It is time for us to have a common goal to educate all West Australian gardeners. Just as humans can cause massive detrimental change, so too can they be responsible for beneficial alterations in the natural world. Urban dwellers can make radical changes to their immediate environment just as readily as those who enjoy spacious country living. Wouldn't it be nice to have a lot of understanding, some environmental conscience, and a little imagination blended with the principles of good landscaping and the results applied to our public areas? I think this is really sums up what I'm proposing, and I'm proposing that I will, with the help of others, start native garden notes. And this will be like the gardener's equivalent to Flora base or something like that. Anyway, that's what it will be. And I've had people like Richard Clark saying, why don't we have a list of plants that people can buy for their gardens? We need more information. And he's been asking for it for ages. So I'm hoping that he will then support this, and I'm sure he will. So all of you who receive Australian plants, I have done a survey of lots of people, quite a lot of people, should I say, who receive this. And I have said to them, do you read it? Now, we also receive this with a newsletter, and I think most people probably read the newsletter. But I've had people say to me, no, I don't read it because it always comes at the same time as my bird book or my King's Park magazine. Or other people say, it's too full of Eastern States things, so I haven't read it. Or I just don't have the time. Well, this one here I did read, and I'm one of those people who did read it and thought, God, it's full of some really, really fantastic stuff. I remember that. And then I put it in the shelf and promptly forgot all about it. But I am going to suggest that everybody who did receive this, go back and read it. It's like, well, it is Jim Barrow. He must have put such a lot of effort into writing this. The whole thing is essays from WA by Jim. And I can honestly say it is really good. And if we could expand some of this information into the gardening notes, it will be great, because there's lots and lots of it. One of the, well, there's several things that he has written that are very interesting. And one is the fact that he started up a garden here when he moved to WA, and he couldn't get it to grow. And I've just lost my notes on that one. But anyway, he started up this garden and couldn't work out why things grew initially and then they didn't grow very well. Now I'm going to read this out to you because it is actually really interesting. And this was a thing that I thought, I should have known this. Why didn't I know this before? And what it is. He says, finally, a word about terminology, and it's about this fungicide here. The acids formed from fully oxidized forms of sulfur and phosphorus end with an ic, thus sulfuric and phosphoric acids. The salts from these acids are called sulfates and phosphates. For the less oxidized forms, the ending is aus, and thus sulfurous and phosphorus acids. The salts are called sulfites and phosphites. That sounds very logical, but the problem is that phosphorus acid does not exist in solution. And I can tell you that if you go and shake this bottle, it's a liquid. Phosphorus acid is not an appropriate name. The correct name is phosphonic acid, and its salts are called phosphonates. Now, this all comes up because Jim he found that things weren't growing very well in his garden. And what he ended up by doing, without testing or anything, he went through and he sprayed his garden and he injected the trees and shrubs. And he describes this really well, and how some plants, well, some of them just responded immediately. And so he said, if you're having problems with your garden, here's to quote him: if you're having trouble keeping your plants alive, consider the possibility that the problem is Phytophthora. The simplest diagnosis is treatment. If treatment cures the problem, then deduce that it is caused by Phytophthora. But what he points out is that we all refer to Phytophthora or think of it as Phytophthora cinnamomi, which is not true, because he says there's lots of native Phytophtheras, and the one that he says probably is Phytophthora multivora. And multivora means that it eats lots of things. And it was first identified in 2009. And apparently it will attack the bark on chewet trees, Eucalyptus gomphocephala, and jarrah trees. And sometimes it'll girdle the stems and then they'll suddenly die. That for other plants, it's kind of the native Phytophthora have the plants suffer a slow death, whereas Phytophthora cinnamomi is a much quicker death. He sprayed Eucalyptus erythrocoris that had a big hole in the trunk and was looking really miserable, and then he photographed it sometime later and it was looking much happier. He said with Aleogine or Aleogny, how people say it, Tugalii, when he didn't inject it, it lasted about a year. But with the injection, the plant lasted more than 5 years and still alive when he wrote this article, which was in 2021. So I think the fact that you don't have to have your garden tested or anything. If you have a problem, treat the tree or treat the plants. Now, it's made me think very seriously, because I have got 3 trees out in my garden and one Mary, which is a pink flowering Mary, which I love. And I've noticed that the bark just looks a little bit unhappy. So what am I going to do? I'm going to treat it. And I think this is what we can advise other people to do. Because this, what it should be called phosphite, is actually, it's not poisonous or anything like that. It's actually quite good. And I gather that it doesn't actually kill the fungus. It just helps to protect the plant against the fungus. So think that if you're having problems, think it could be Phytophthora multivora. Lots of people our lack of knowledge, and I'm going to do several did you knows. The lack of knowledge is we just don't know enough about the plants. And so somebody writing, Nuri Mas, writing in Australian plants, this is his difference between Banksias and Hakeas. Flowers like little clustering threads caught against a bush or tree, long flat leaves or needle sharp, Hakeas are we. And then spikes of massed and fragrant flowers in the bushland glowing, rugged trees with branches odd, this way, that way going. Old man, seeding heads all say, here's a Banksia growing. Jim Barrow has another solution to that. He said, if you want to know the difference between the grevillea fruits and the Hakea fruits, what you do is you put your hands together, as in an Asian greeting, and open them at the fingertips, keeping the wrists together, and now you are a Hakea. Close them, and then open at the little fingers, and now you are a grevillea. Down below there, I've shown a grevillea where it's about to split open, and then that's a Hakea nut too. So recently I gave a talk at the Kelmscott show, and I started going around and asking people what they thought about the Banksia flowers. And so I had a bunch of flowers in my hand, And then I said, now there's 30 flowers in this bunch. And then what I did was I added a Banksia ashbyi, and I said, how many flowers I've got in my bunch? And nobody could even give a vague idea of how many I had in my bunch. We as gardeners seem to fail to realize that this Banksia here is probably, according to what I read in the books, they can have up to 1,000 flowers in each Banksia. And this could have, say, 800 or something. All the people I asked, nobody actually had any idea of how many flowers. And each one of those is a little flower. And when you look at the nuts at the end, it makes you realize just how few of them actually do get are truly pollinated and fertilized, because there are not many seeds come out of the Banksia nuts. Some of them, a lot do, but some of them very few, which probably explains why Banksia seeds are so expensive, because there's not very good pollination and fertilization. In these magazines, apart from the one I've just mentioned, I've just picked out some really interesting things. This one is Harry Butler, and it's way back. I can't see it from here now, but it's a long time ago. He was asked to write about his garden, and he said, look, it's really good to set up a native garden, but when you do, it's very hard to attract big lizards and things like that. And he said that, many people are not happy about sharing a garden with a snake, but bona fide native plant growers remove the snake rather than kill it. He also had other things. He said, why do we go and watch nature programs on the television when, if you've got a good native garden, all you have to do is sit in your garden with a cup of tea or a glass of red and watch nature, and you can see it in front of you. He also, this has nothing to do with natives, but it's actually to do growing veggies. He said he's worked out that he couldn't stop the kangaroos and other critters nicking his veggies. So what he did was put a light on the patch at night. And basically what happened, it attracted the kangaroos don't like the light, and a lot of the other creatures don't like it, but the insects do, and they would flutter up. And there would be, the frogs would appear and they would start eating the insects. And then some of the insects would die by knocking themselves out on the shade or the light. And so early in the morning, the New Holland honeyeaters would fly in and have a good feed, and they'd move off. And then the butcher bird would come in and finish off all the spiders that came in to get and so it goes on. He had some good, he also said about having, he made it very clear to all the birds that he didn't like cats. And so the birds used to set out an alarm when there was a cat around, and he would go and chase the cat out. And one day the birds were calling the alarm, saying, there's a cat, there's a cat. And so he raced over there, but there wasn't a cat. It was a big lizard, and it was going up the tree. And he then the birds never forgave him, because he didn't realize that what they were really calling was, there's danger, and not, there's a cat, there's a cat. It's a good article. If you can track it down, read it, it's really good. Then there's another one with Bob Dixon in his garden, and it was a grass paddock before he started it off, and there were sheep in it, and he didn't have much money or anything, and he recycled everything. He didn't buy any mulching. He didn't have a mulcher, and he used to just cut everything up and put it down onto the ground. And most of his mulching was Banksia nuts, nuts from off the marries and things like that. He ended up with some prolific recruits in his garden, like Pattersonia oxydentalis, Anicaxanthus manglesii, Dryandra polycephala, and Grevillea McCutcheonii, which is rare. He planted that, and it's just popping up all over his garden. and he actually attracted back 9 orchid species. But he had the advantage of actually being very aware that his land was sand over loam and clay. Oh, I should have said, on the bottom there is Janet and Rob Atkins's garden in Mundaring. Recently, Janet came to the Wildflower Society talk at the Armadale group, and she gave us a list of the plants that grow well in her garden in Mundaring. That's the kind of information we should be getting out in the garden notes. So there's lots of, not just necessarily just particular species, but about what you can plant in your garden if you're in Mundaring and things like that. This is very interesting to me. This is absolutely revealing. And on my surveying at the Kelmscott Show and other people, I've asked this. Did anybody know about this? Only in Australia are the dominant trees pollinated by birds, and only in Australia and nearby lands are the pollinating birds so big. Southwest WA has more than 600 different plants with flowers attended by birds. Europe has no bird pollinators. There are 67 nectar feeders in the eastern states, and Southern Africa has 22 nectar feeders. The colonist G.F. Moore told of Banksia producing an abundance of honey, which the natives are fond of regaling upon, either by sucking or soaking the flowers in water. My further reading, I heard or read that in South Africa, the birds are hummingbirds and they're small, and there is one in Costa Rica, which is a hummingbird that pollinates an orchid, but that's it. This is really important, and I think I find myself thinking, why are we putting in all these foreign trees when we need to be feeding our birds? And we're not doing it, and we're just depriving the birds of habitat and some good food. Did you know that 25% of Eremophila species suit requirements for nectar-eating birds? And somebody told me at a Wildflower Society meeting not long ago that some of the birds drill into the back of the smaller Eremophila flowers to access the nectar because they can't get in the front. A recent Australian plants, there was an article, and I asked several people again whether they'd read it, and they hadn't. And Marie McCarthy wrote a really good article, and she's from the eastern states, and it's back to what is more insects. She says they may not be as flashy as birds, but they get the job done, and plants know it. In fact, every single insect has a purpose within the functioning of native ecosystems. So the next time you see an insect hanging around a native plant, know that it is not just a random encounter, it's a love story in the making. The plant is saying, hey babe, come on over here and pollinate me. And the insect is saying, oh yeah. She also had a sort of a list, but the bit I've copied is about Melaleuca quinquenervia. It supports 409 native herbivore species where it is endemic, which isn't here, it's in Northern Australia and Queensland. But after 120 years of it growing in North America, it supports just 8 species. So it does make me wonder how many herbivore species does Melaleuca quinquenervia support here in WA. I don't know if anybody's done it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not many either. Did you know that honeybees are great pollinators, but our native hoverflies are too? There are about 200 species of native hoverflies. And that's my photo of a hoverfly. We have many native bees, and hoverflies scrape the pollen off their eyes so that they can see, putting it into little balls with their feet and then eating it. And did you know a blowfly can carry twice as much pollen as a honeybee? Blowflies can carry pollen from up to 37 different species of native plants. That was from the ABC Science Programme. Did you know that ants in the propagation of between 1/3 and 1/2 of all native Australian plants? Ants help ensure the future of plants. worker ants drag seeds underground and eat any fleshy appendages. These seeds are protected from bushfires and drought. And those ants on the left, I was counting kangaroos one morning down at Lowlands, and I had the opportunity to watch them. Don't want to get bitten by them, I can tell you that. They hurt. Our problem is that not enough people who are gardening in Western Australia actually appreciate the soil, and they don't look at the soils. They don't understand that the coastal soils are alkaline, the next lot probably sort of fairly neutral, and then you get into the acid sands, and then you get into granite and rock and all of that. People just don't know. Also, people don't, they don't understand about pH, and you can't see the whole of this, but yeah, this is my thing that I use to try and make people realize that how acid things become, very acid and alkaline and so on. And the sand underneath our nursery is very acid. And I always say to my customers, we're acid under here, but if you come from the beach, you're alkaline. But you can't say that for the whole of the Southwest, because when you go inland, things are a bit different. And the yellow sand sort of east of Wongan Hills is probably acid rather than alkaline. So, but it does apply. The Swan Coastal Plain, people just don't know enough. And people are always saying, oh, I've got this shitty sand. It's not shitty sand. It's lovely, and it grows beautiful, beautiful plants. So this is a soil test kit. I try and sell it to people. Actually, most of the time you can tell them when they just tell you where they live, you can tell what sort of sand they've got. But it's important to know, as particularly if you're a landscaper, and most of them don't seem to know this at all. It's also important to test the bore water. Sabrina Hahn told me that in the western suburbs, a lot of the water from the bores is becoming salty, and it's probably the same all the way around. And because everybody's putting bores down, and somebody else told me, I'm just trying to remember who it was now, that if you fly over some areas, you can actually see where the bores of the plants around the bores are just dying because there's no water. This is the native plants. Here with our nursery, we actually have our water tested every year, and we have a really decent water test done, so we know what the situation is with the water. So this is a Eucalyptus todtiana suffering from high alkaline irrigation water, and Hans Lambers has done some really interesting work on this, and he had a very good Facebook presentation some years ago on this, and it was quite revealing to me. So I'm always saying to my customers, just get your bore water tested. If only take it to the swimming pool shop, and then you know what the pH is, and you know how much salt is in the water. Other things that are interesting, so we could put into the native notes, and it's this. We've been growing this for a while, and I've often wondered, why is it called Pamela? Anyway, this person, Charles Nelson, lives in the UK, but he came out here and did a PhD, and he had to go to Albany to do a lot of his work, and it was on these guys. And Pamela Sanderson was she's an amateur botanist, and she was very kind to him and put him up and went out with him and stuff like that. So little stories like this just would make the notes just a bit more interesting. We could also put on that it's really useful to plant from tube stock, and what forestry tubes are, and what sort of smaller tubes are, and how that they have root trainers on the insides of the tube, so that the roots don't go round and round, that they go down. Long stem planting. Angus Stewart produced a really lovely book, and I've had it here just now, and it's on landscaping with Australian natives, and it's an excellent book, and he was the one who came up publicizing the long stem planting. But the book is typical of a lot of books written by people like him, is the fact that the book doesn't say anything about the environment or the birds or the insects or whatever it is. It's just basically, this is how you garden and this is how to plant your plants and so on. The environment doesn't seem to get any mention. So this is the start of my native gardening notes. This is roughly what I'm going to do. And I'm hoping that other people, I've asked several other people if they'll help and give me advice and things like that. But this is something that I think is quite important. This is fairly detailed, this one, but because thanks to Roger Harrington, we have a very comprehensive database in our nursery, and we've been building on it for a very long time. And these are the labels that come off and we use in our nursery. So we are telling people about the soil and the environment with every plant. And I have noticed people now come in and they photograph this label, and what do they find out from that other than the memory of the plant? But what I'm hoping is that we will either QR code or have some other method, so they will photograph it or in the nursery, and it will take them to this further information here, which is explaining how black boys or grass trees are monocotyledons. And it says quite clearly, well, it was Mr. David Bedford who completed a PhD on grass trees in 1988, and he said in ordinary language that everybody can understand why they don't last very long. And when they're dug out of the ground and relocated, a lot of them die. I had a discussion about this with Hazel Dempster, and she said nobody's ever done a survey to actually see how long these grass trees last. And when you drive around, you can see dead ones in quite a lot of gardens. Not long ago, Gardening Australia, Josh interviewed Sabrina Hahn, and she had a dead one in her garden. And he should have said, well, Sabrina, why do you think it's died? But he didn't. But I asked Sabrina, because I saw her a couple of weeks later, and she said she thought it had died because she had put alkaline water on it to keep it happy. But if you read this, you realize that in actual fact, it's probably not that, and that they can survive for up to 4 years with nothing until they die. So if they don't adapt well, they die. And another problem probably is, and it doesn't say it in here, that if I was in the business of digging out grass trees, I wouldn't be digging them out of clay because it would be hard work, and probably coastal sands would be the best. But of course, then you're digging them from an alkaline sand, and most people are then moving them back into an acid sand. And does that help? I'm not sure. I don't know what the answer is, but there are some successes, but there are obviously a lot of failures. And so this is a good reason for having the notes. This is Hebertia grossularifera folia. And here is one of the articles out of the Australian Plants magazine, and it's from Alex George. Actually, no, this is the Wildflower Society magazine, and he explains interesting things about this Hebertia, that it's the flowers close at night and they open up again in the morning and things like that. This is unusual for Hebertias. And Rob Davis from the Herbarium, I asked him about it, and he said there are some other Hebertias that do it, but most of them don't. But this is a very interesting one, it can be grown in shady areas and under trees and things like that. There's lots of other stuff we could add to these notes as we go along. As Rob Davis said, if you publish a book, it's out of date before the day, even just the day you've published it. Whereas this, we can go on changing it, altering it, improving the pictures and things like that. And everything that we will be doing will be referenced. So you won't be just getting my opinion, because my opinion doesn't stand for much, but all these other magazines, it'll all be referenced. So people can criticize as much as they like and put in other things. And so we could have notes on, you can add lots of gardening things apart from the planting. Mulching would be quite controversial, I think, because I'm a believer in not mulching, but other people think they are. And I found some very interesting scientific descriptions of what mulch does and how it actually can damage or it can help. And this could all be added to these. Natives make great bonsai. And the one above on the top is a pot I made from air-dried clay, and it's just good fun, and they're very rewarding. And some of them, like some of the Calathaniuses, make fantastic bonsai, and they're tough as anything. We just use plain old Bailey's potting mix, and they seem to survive really well. I think the hardest thing is that they do have to be kept moist. This is there again, we could put it in the notes. And this is an interesting one. This is from the ABC Science. Do you know what causes hay fever? And the number of people who have said, oh, can't have this because it causes hay fever. Basically, it's grasses that do it. The wattles are usually pollinated by insects, and the pollen grains are heavy and cannot be carried by the wind. And they said that the grass pollen can be carried up to 15 kilometers an hour. So that's something that could be added. We could also go into bush tucker and add bush tucker on. I don't think we'll add this one on, but I thought this was fun. A recipe for camel stew. 3 medium-sized camels, 1 ton of salt, 1 ton of pepper, 500 bushels of potatoes, 200 bushels of carrots, 3,000 sprigs of parsley, and 2 small rabbits. Cut camel into bite-sized pieces. This should take 2 months. Cut vegetables into cubes, another 2 months. Place meat in pan and cover with 1,000 gallons of brown gravy. Simmer for 4 weeks. Shovel in pepper and salt to taste. When meat is tender, add vegetables. Simmer slowly for 4 weeks. Garnish with parsley. Will serve 3,800 people. If more are expected, add 2 rabbits. That was in one of these magazines, and I thought, oh, that'd be fun. We won't be putting that in, but it's just a nice one. One of the things I read in one of these magazines, it says, don't be a whinger, because if you're always whinging, you'll never get anything done. And so even if you don't want to garden, there's lots of other things you can do. And there's people around me, like in Byford, there's a group who pick up rubbish every Sunday morning. And if Byford would be groaning in rubbish if it hadn't been for them. There's a group in Jarradale that does it, and now there's a group in Serpentine that do it. And so picking up rubbish, if you can't garden, at least pick up rubbish. So here. I loved the poem, The Owl and the Pussycat. And so here we are. Here's a poem that came out of one of the books, and I'm going to read it in my best poetry fashion. The surfy and the greeny fair were strolling on the beach, hand in hand along the sand, for each was fond of each. They loved to walk beside the sea, for so much could it teach. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all its might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd, because the beach displayed a horrid sight. The sea was wet as wet could be, the sand was dry as dry. You could not see a cloud, because no cloud was in the sky, but bottles, plastic, ropes, and gunk along the beach did lie. The surfy and his greeny fair were feeling rather sad. They wept like anything to see a beach that looked so bad. If only this was only cleared away, we'd both be very glad. If 7 blokes with 7 sacks scavenged for half a year, do you suppose, the surfy said, that they would get it clear? I doubt it, said the greeny green, and shed a bitter tear. For there's all the picnickers and others of their kind. They come here to enjoy the beach, but rubbish leave behind. Thongs and plates and plastic bags, they really must be blind. And then there's all the industries with factories near the shores. Their litter washes down the creeks, and on the beach doth pours plastic foam and packaging against pollution laws. Lastly are the mariners upon the ocean blue, with little louts aboard the ships, both passengers and crew, inshore and offshore fishermen with floats and drift nets too. The oceans are full of gunk across the world so wide, it keeps forever floating in on each and every tide. People just chuck things overboard, both port and starboard side. 2/3 of the surface of the earth is occupied by sea. Our planetary rubbish tip, it will too easily be, unless we try to keep it clean, and that means you and me. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. There was it's obviously a lot of detail out there. I can see why you've had the great idea to put them all into one so people can access it. If anyone does have any questions, of course, please send them through. There's no better chance to ask these questions when we have a professional who has all of this knowledge and that can answer, hopefully, all the questions that we have, or do their best at least. The soil testing kits looked really interesting. How do people get those?
I have to say, well, we do sell them, but I could say I think you can buy them in Bunnings. That other nurseries would probably sell them, but they're actually a very good one. I think they were invented by CSIRO, very easy to use, and yes, excellent, if you're not sure.
Yeah, they look like a great starting point for anyone who's not too sure about the soil or things like that. They're very extensive information that I don't think a lot of professionals can possibly know all of the answers to. So if you get one of those soil testing kits, it seems like a great place to start planting your garden. And I'm sure places like the Australian Native Nursery can help you out if you bring those results in.
I think the problem we're facing is with landscapers who really don't have to have any qualifications or anything, and people can just set themselves up as a landscaper. And we had one in just recently, and he said, "Oh, I want some trees." And I said, "Well, what trees do you want?" He said, "I don't care, I want some trees." And I said, "What's your soil type?" And he said, "I don't have to know the soil type." You see, that's really sad, because he obviously had no idea that the soil type is the important thing. Yeah. I could add that there's a really good book, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's no, you can't. It's called Unraveling the Secret Lives of Plant Root Systems, and it's by John Pate, Tina Bell, and Bill Verboon. It is a wonderful book. It was $50 when I bought it. It's now only 15, which is a bit sad. So I've been telling everybody to go and buy the book. It is an excellent book because it is, they've mixed high science in explaining things with good down-to-earth information on things. So it's you just pick through and you skip the science bit if you don't understand it. But you see, a lot of that we could get into these garden notes. For instance, Banksia licifolia was one of the things they had, and it's a Banksia that root suckers, and that's unusual. And he said he describes it as a spectacular plant with lines of sucker roots forming at intervals along the lengths of the stout laterals, radiating out tens of meters in several directions from the base of the parent tree. I mean, it doesn't do it with obviously every Banksia licifolia. He said some of them, but there we are going clearing the bush, and we have no idea what we're doing. We have no idea how we're damaging the tree when we're digging away from it tens of meters away. Yeah, there's just so much more that we could glean from all of this information.
Yeah, most definitely. We've got Kit who's raised their hand to ask a question. I'll just unmute their mic so they ask themselves.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm curious. Thanks for sharing the presentation. It's for Nancy, obviously loves reading, or she, connecting through the written words. I'm curious, for those of us that do not learn through reading and writing, what other resources, let's say audio, those of us that learn more through audio visual support and being hands-on for the native side?
That's an interesting question. I think basically with the notes, we don't want to make them too detailed so that it's easy for people to read anyway. But we could also add lots of pages onto each of them. So if you could move on and you could go, oh, look, I could cook with that or whatever. But with modern day media, and now that we've got this fantastic database that Roger set up for us, there is so much we could do. We just don't appreciate. The last 5 years has changed hugely. So what you're asking, why not? Why couldn't we present some of these things in more detail? It isn't, we just need to have the information. And now that people can photograph so well with their cameras, and we could just, with their phones, we could do lots. There's lots of opportunity. So I've told quite a lot of people that I want to do these garden notes, and I've had a lot of people offer to help and give me better photography and things like that, and more information. And it just could be, we could have it so that we can present little videos, or there's just lots of opportunity. We just have to have subject matter first.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Kit. That was a great question. I think those scientific articles can be very difficult to get through, especially when you're not used to reading them, or you just learn in different ways. I think there are a few podcasts out there at the moment. I think there's one called I think it's called All the Dirt, which is available on Spotify, I know, at least, which talks about things like that. So that could be a good one to check out as well. So we also had a question. Oh, sorry, I've just lost it then. So Donna's just asked, if our soil is alkaline and our bore water is acidic, do they balance each other out?
No, and I doubt whether the bore water would be acidic. I think you'll probably find it's also alkaline. But no, they don't cancel each other out. Definitely not. And I think if you've got an alkaline soil, choose the plants that will grow in an alkaline soil. That measurement of pH is actually not a measurement of the sand or the soil. It's a measurement of water. And so I've had somebody say, oh, I bought the kit and it didn't work because they were trying to measure dry sand. It's the water in the sand is what you're growing in. That's your measuring.
Okay. I think there was just a bit of confusion when you spoke about not having mulch. So I think we've just had a few people ask, if you could clarify a bit on what you mean when you say no mulch. And specifically, Janet has asked, if no mulch, how do you deter weeds in the space between new plantings?
One of the reasons for not having mulch is naturally, if you look in the bush, there are areas of bare sand, and those areas are needed by some of the native bees that need to drill holes in the sand in order to survive. And birds like pardalots, they will drill holes into sand as well. And if you're covering it all in mulch, we're actually depriving some of our fellow creatures of somewhere to live. Look at the bush and you'll see the bush has bare patches as well as mulchy patches. And I mean, I just think that at the time we have at the moment, there's a shortage of pine bark and things like that. Why are we using it just to mulch our gardens? I'm a firm believer in buying a Dutch hoe and just hoe when the plants, when the weeds are young. That's probably one of the best ways to do it. But no, you don't have to mulch. And if you are going to do it, probably some of the best mulch is chunky stuff like Bob Dixon used, which was nuts and leaves from eucalypts and stuff. So it shelters the sand, but it doesn't make it compact. The mulch doesn't compact. And I know, and I've read in a lot of this, when you mulch thickly, the mulch starts to break down and it starts to compost, and then it holds the moisture in the top layer. And people forget that the sand underneath is just compacting. And so the plants will think, oh gosh, it's nice and damp up there, and the roots will turn round and go back up to the surface. And so that's what you don't want. You want the roots to go down much lower. Hans Lambers has written he edited a publication, and there was an article in there, and it's called bioturbating, which is what bandicoots do. They dig holes in the sand and they break up the compaction of the sand, and that's what we should be doing too. So if you're going to mulch, don't just leave it there. Go with a garden fork and then dig into the sand and do the bioturbating into the sand to let the water through. Otherwise, the sand becomes like cement and it doesn't let the water through, and it just stays up the top with the mulch, and your garden will sadly be very unhappy.
So Bianca's asked a very good question, which I think is the next natural step after testing soil. Bianca's asked, once I know my soil type and so on, how do I choose the appropriate plants?
Well, at the moment, I could say that you come into our nursery and we show you, because it's all marked on the labels. But once these notes come up, I probably move through a bit too quickly, but it's all there. So you can see what the soil type is for your plant. You can choose it. So yes.
So does the garden notes, if you know what plants match each soil type, does it also include things like distribution maps? Because obviously you could have similar soil types, maybe not but plants not growing from specific areas. Does it include things like that?
It does to a degree. For our labels in the nursery, we found actually one of the most useful things from Flora base has been the local government areas where things grow, but that isn't very helpful if you happen to be, say, the Shire of Harvey, where there are people who live right up in the hills and there are people right down on the beach. Or the city of Armadale, which the hills, people in the hills, but down on the flat in the grey sands below. But it does give you an idea of where the plants come from and things like that. Yeah, this is what's missing. What you're asking for is all that's missing, really. And we've done it in our nursery, but you know, Kings Park has a sale and it's like a bun fight, and there's all these people who queue up for hours to get in there, and they just grab the plants. Most of the time they don't know what they're grabbing, but it's just for the sake of being able to do it. And you know, if you were to ask how many people lose the plants, how do they survive, we wouldn't know. But we know because people come back and tell us. They're quick to complain if they think that things are wrong, but they don't go back to Kings Park. But I love the sales at Kings Park because it gives an indication how people are changing, and they do want to have native gardens. I think the world is changing now. We've just got to provide more information, and people don't have to wade through all the magazines and stuff that I'm wading through. But I have to say, if you want to do it, do it. I've just been offered a whole lot of Australian Geographic magazines, which are years old. I'm going to tackle them too, because I'm sure I'll find something in there as well.
Michelle has asked, in regards to available resources, have you had anything to do with the Australian Native Plant Society study groups, such as the Garden Design Study Group, and then which WA Wildflower Society of WA members can join? Seems like it would be a good resource. However, from what I've seen so far, it's largely non-WA participants and info.
I think that is the problem. And no, I haven't had much to do, although I have had a good look through. There was a bonsai one, and I had a good look through that because that's interesting, but that's closed down now. But there's basically the study groups are good. that they're there for people to see and to, but I just found, what I really think I'm saying is that there's all this information in books, and it ends up on shelves, and it gets forgotten. So Jim Barrow, who is a mountain of information, and I found him in all sorts of these magazines. I don't know how much time he spends doing it, but that one that I asked everybody, said, please read if you can, must have spent such a lot of time doing that. And it's kind of got forgotten in the shelves of people. And this is what I want to get out of those shelves. So the study groups are fine, but there's just all this other stuff. You know, people like Kingsley Dixon has written a really good book on coastal plants, and he tells you what to plant with what, because they're companion plants. How many of us know about that? And then Hans Lambers came into my nursery the other day and he said, you see that Eucalyptus todtiana over there? And I said, yes, I reckon it's about 200 years old. And he said, yes, I agree with you. He said, but do you realize it has a symbiotic relationship with the banksias that are around it? How did he know that? But this is the information we need to extract from him and get into our garden notes.
Yes, definitely. I think having a good medium between all of these different type, literature that, is out there, which is very intricate, and I guess most people just don't have the time, and I guess as well desire to, transverse through all of those copies. So I think it's really important to have an easy medium such as your garden notes, where people can take those bits and pieces that you've chosen, and I think that would be very helpful for everyone, and learning about how to help move along their garden.
I tell you what, once you start doing it, and it is such a rewarding thing to do, and we can see it with our customers. They come in and they go, oh, I've got a black thumb, I don't know how to do it. And it's not that they've got a black thumb, it's the fact that there's nobody's educated them, nobody's told them how to do it. And if you happen to have come from Jordan, and I said to a fellow from Jordan, well, why don't you know of that? And he said, because we've just got desert. And then we had another customer, and we told her how to dig a hole, and she said, I don't know, I've never dug one. And I said, why not? And she said, because I lived in a flat in Singapore. So we've got all these people coming here, and they come from Europe, and to them, they're not looking at the birds and going, oh, there's birds drinking from the flowers. They probably just don't even realize it's happening. And yet it is, and it's so important. And we just have to feed the birds, and we have to feed the insects. And we all come here thinking, well, it's just the same as where I came from. And then they go on, oh, it's shitty sand and all of that. It's not shitty sand. It's wonderful. And it's supported the biggest biodiversity of flora in the whole world. And here we are treating it so badly, and treating our fellow creatures so badly because we don't understand how they work. So one of the things I read, somebody said, oh, get rid of the ants, pour boiling water down the ant hole. What are the ants? They're part of the whole system. We need the ants. We need everything.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very hard thing to cope with, I think, about making sure we can bridge that gap like you talk about. I think it's very, very important, and I think you're doing really, really good work, and I hope everyone here can benefit from it. So yeah, so when does your garden notes, do you have a date, or how do people access them?
Well, just give me a bit of time. Yeah, I've got to get my IT specialist on board. Well, he is on board, but he'll be cringing now, going, oh God, not another thing she's come up with. We've got to work out how to do it, because we've had people suggesting that we could do it as an app, or we could do it as a QR code, or even just a list on the web page. But I'm hoping it'll be a Wildflower Society thing as well. It'll be all of us together. So so we will include the species from the Northern Suburbs Nursery, the Wildflower Society Nursery, what a paste grows, what Muche plant farm grows, because if we include everybody, then people can see what's available and they'll start using it. But as it is now, you have to travel all the way to Mouchet to see what Natalie's growing, and she'll have some on a list, and she's like us, has an online shop. It's really hard keeping up with all the species on an online shop. Yeah, so we've got, I don't know, 400 or 500 species up there, but we actually, in our nursery, we've got close to 3,000, but they're not all commercial. They're all just ones we keep running along with, thinking, oh, they might be good, they might be good. We get people like Phil James from the Aeromophila Nursery has gifted us a huge number of his Aeromophilas because he's scared they'll get lost, and they were, you know, they won't be in people's gardens. So we're trying to tackle and propagate all of them as well. We found people have been very generous in giving us species. Somebody found like a Darwinia growing in his parents' garden in Dalwallinu or somewhere like that, and he said, oh, would you like some cuttings? You know, it's that sort of thing. We've got to get this stuff into people's gardens, so then Kings Park will not have 10 million people go through there next year. They'll have 5 million, and the other 5 will drive around our suburbs going, oh, look at these lovely, lovely suburbs. Look at all these lovely plants, instead of brown lawn and yuccas.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that, and I think it's something we all are desperately looking forward to, step by step. And I think this is a great step to take. So I guess we'll the Wildflower Society at least will be waiting to hear from you, and waiting until you're ready and your IT specialist is all ready to go, so we can get this moving and everyone can have a look. And hopefully, you know, if you can send a list through maybe of all the recommended readings and books that you have, and then we can put that on our society as well through the events page and things like that for people that are interested.
I think also some of the magazines that we've found, the ones I've been given, the Australian nature ones are actually, they're no longer being published, those magazines, and they were first published in 1921 or something, and I think it must have stopped early this century. I'm not quite sure when it stopped, but you can actually access them online and have a look. So you know, I will reference them and you can have a look online. But it's interesting because Greg picked them up from the dump shop for $10, and now they're for sale on eBay for $20 each. So I won't be giving them away in a hurry, I can tell you that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here and being a part of our webinar series. We really appreciate it, and I think we all are very excited to have a look at your website, or what, you know, app or QR code, whatever it turns out to be. I think we're all very excited for that, and we'll circulate that suggested reading list as well for people that are interested, and, you know, at least through that way we can start promoting and spreading the knowledge just in the meantime. But thank you so much for jumping on and sharing all of that with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for listening.
It's our pleasure. So our next webinar next November, well, this November, will be with Steve Hopper from UWA. So please make sure everyone keeps posted, and we'll be releasing information about that within the next few weeks. So make sure you keep an eye out and get your tickets nice and early. So thank you, Nancy, again, and thank you everyone as well for giving us your Thursday night, and we hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.